Hello everyone and welcome to a new video. In this video I will focus on textures which was added to Nomad Sculpt last week. So what version of Nomad Sculpt we're running? It's Nomad 1.55 as you can see in front of you. Please consider liking this video, subscribing to this channel and check my other videos which would help you get running with Nomad Sculpt. So how does the texture work? First of all, texture is added as part of painting. So if we click on painting, which is this brush in here, and scroll all the way down, you would find that there is a texture added. Something you need to be aware of, it's not always automatically working, so you need to click on stroke painting in order to activate it. Once that is done, now you could load your texture. Another aspect you need to be aware of is that it works with all tools, including the painting tool and the stamp tool. And it works with combination with the material, meaning if I have a material here with roughness and metalness, the texture will take the properties and apply these properties into the material on the mesh. Also, the color here determines the color of the texture. So for example, let's start with this sphere that we have in here, and I want to jump into paint, and in paint in here I would still have access to the stroke and alphas, which also would impact somehow the texture. So if I go and move all the way down, the current stroke type is dot, which I've talked about it before. However, what I want to do now is to grab it, and the grab I want it to be dynamic. What is the difference between these? Is that dot works as if you're familiar with Photoshop or any other drawing software. It takes that alpha and you apply it with the line. Grab is more like you are grabbing it across the sphere. So I am in the grab dynamic. The fall off, I have left it as the default. The scaling, we will talk a little bit about it, and that's what you need to have. Now getting back to the texture, in painting there is no need for you to tick it. It's already ticked for you. So what you need to have is just to load a texture. You will already have these three textures, which are the default textures for Nomad Sculpt, but you can add any other textures by clicking on the cross in here. And you could do a batch textures adding by adding them to the folder created on your device. In here I'm using an iPad, meaning I would need to go to my files on my iPad, Nomad, and under Nomad I will find that. So let's start with what you can do with this. So I have here an iris for an eye, and I've selected it as a texture. Now I've mentioned that it would take the properties from here. So if I move all the roughness down, you can see that the preview is showing you how that would look like if you apply it. But once I have selected it, it disappeared and showing me the exact material applied to this sphere. Now, I don't want the symmetry, so you have the symmetry here, because symmetry would allow you to have a symmetrical drawing. By the way, the other feature which is big on Nomad Sculpt 1.55 is the axial symmetry, which I might create another tutorial focusing on that. So we have the texture selected, we've set the painting to be grabbed, and now if I grabbed it, you can see that the textures have been applied to the surface. The other factor you need to be aware of is that the density of the mesh, so if I turn on the wire, determine the quality of the textures. And why is that? Because textures work similarly to painting, and it uses vertex colors. So the more vertex you have, the better the resolution is. So as you can see here, I've grabbed the iris. It does not look quite right, and we need to do a little bit of modification for the actual brush in order to make it works good. But imagine if you have to manually draw this would take a lot of your time. Now you can just create an eye by dragging a texture into it. Now let's go into the stroke paint. And for the stroke paint, I want to turn off the fall off. Let me see what happens. You can see now that the fall off has been turned off. And now you can see that we don't have the fading that is happening around, but that does not look quite right. What can we do is go back to the alphas and see if we turn off the alpha. This white means there is no alpha applied. And now you can see that the eye is exactly squared. If you are worried about this jagged line, you can just make sure that you have the render resolution as high and you have the smooth shading. And even if you have them as high, what would happen is because of the geometry information, so mesh's density, this would be impacted. So how to get around it? You need to always subdivide your geometry. And if I go to my scene, as you can see here, I have this sphere selected. Go to the topology and then add another subdivision, and this subdivision would allow the texture to be even looking better. So textures and paintings work the same way. The difference is that in texture, the vertex colors is not mono, so it's not one color, but it's a collection and usually coming from a texture. If you're working on a commercial project, make sure that the textures you are using are copyrighted to you, or you're allowed to use them, so they are not copyrighted to someone else. If you're working on education, then yes, feel free to play with them. Just keep that in mind. You can find plenty of textures on different websites, including even the normal image search. So we have the eye in here. Let me make this a little bit better. How to do this? By making sure it is centered and into a scale that is appropriate for an eye. And now we have an eye that you could add to your characters. So what other use you could have from the texture? Everything works the same way, but one thing I like is the possibility to give material their own texture. So I would like to add in here a box. And if I take the box all the way down, I want to validate it. Of course, you can do sculpting and add your texture to your sculpt, but because this is focusing on texture, I would only cover textures and a little bit of techniques that are associated with it. So I want this box to be wooden box. In this case, I could use the paint, and for the paint itself, I would go to the brush, and I have loaded in here a wooden texture. Now for the wooden texture, I would like not it to be purely reflective or purely rough. So it's somewhere in between. So somewhere here would be fine. I don't need metalness at all. What I would like is just to have the texture as it is. Just make sure that the symmetry is off and take this all the way up. Now, you might ask me, Quintilian, this does not look quite right. You're absolutely right. And the reason is because the subdivision is not as enough to show the vertex colors and the details. So I've moved to topology, and then I've started adding these subdivisions. And now you can see that this looks as wood as you wanted it to be. One thing is that this bleed that's happening, and because we've started the texture on a surface that is perpendicular to our view or parallel to what we see, any color would be applied on the other axis, would be projected, and that's why you end up with these. There are different ways of how you can go around them, but I'll show you the way that I think works the best. So one way is you go to your alphas, set your alpha to be your actual square, and this would allow you better control. Still, you would have some bleeding happening. So if I make it a little bit smaller, somewhere like that, and leave it here, that might be it. And then I do another one. The best way I found it to work with surfaces like this is using the cell mask or masking tool. So the cell mask allows you to mask an object, and now you could actually apply that texture to the only masked area. So if I click on the mask, which is the cell mask, and you can manually, by the way, mask it if you would like, and the way to do that is through clicking on mask and draw it. But cell mask, I am in parallel view, not in perspective. Click on the rectangle and then drag all the front surface. Once I've done that, I can click on the properties for the masking and then click on invert, and that would allow this area, which is the unmasked, to be drawn on. Coming back to paint and then drag as simple as this, and you would see that this becomes a clear textures and are projected correctly on that surface. Let me do this again quickly so you get grab of it. So to get out of the mask tool, click again on cell mask, go to the properties, clear, and then click on the rectangle and select which surface you want to draw on. Select it again, invert it, and once you have that in place, I can, by the way, click on solo so it's only showing. Go on top, I am in parallel, click on paint, and because I've already had all my settings correct the first time, I don't need to do this again. And in here I have now my second surface. So again, removing all of these, you can see how clean these textures are and the possibility you would have for creating tables similar to the one I am using now, objects with different material, and clean, easy to do textures. Now if I invert this, I have this surface now. As you can see, it becomes a little bit of a repetitive process, but if you spend more time on your work, then you can get it correctly and right. So keep in mind that textures, I want here to leave the mask, so cell mask, click and clear. So textures work similar to vertex colors. It does not work similar to textures on any other platform similar to Blender, for example, because Blender does not care how many vertices you have. It can map and project directly to your object regardless of the geometry. So what you've seen me doing here is that I'm just trying to fill all these surfaces in a very repetitive way to show you what can be done. So let's get off the solo and click on clear, and now we have a wooden texture for this box. Let's copy this box. You can copy it by selecting it through the gizmo, click on clone and move it all the way to this side. Sometimes you would miss the gizmos, similar to what I am doing now, and you just need to go back and select them. Now I've mentioned that, let's move it to the right actually, so we have a clean front. I've mentioned that the material properties of the paint also impact the texture, and that's what we will do now. So the first texture I have loaded was a wooden texture. Let's go to paint, and in here I would like to have a metal texture, so I have a metal texture loaded. In here I want to force paint everything on top of this cube, and to do so I will put the roughness a little bit down, add a little bit of metalness. I don't want it to be purely reflective, I want to have the texture showing a little bit. Force paint it. And similar to what we've done before, you can simply click on the paint make sure that the symmetry is off, and then drag and have your material. Something is happening here. The material looks yellow, and that's because of the lighting. However, now if I move it around, you can see that the material is looking correct. One thing I've mentioned, and I am probably repeating it, is that if I choose a color, so if it's not white in here and if it's red, what Nomad Sculpt does is that apply this as an overlay. I felt it's an overlay. It might be an ant. So if you are aware of using layers in Photoshop, that could be the way to it. But I'll just show you an example of what that means. So you can see here, there is a clear texture. Let me just save this quickly. There is a clear texture, and this texture now is red. So if you have an image and you would like to have a little bit of color for that material, that is doable. So let me do, for example, the top side to be a little bit of a red material. I am again looking front, selecting all the surfaces on top, and then inverting it, and then jumping into the top using the paint. And I would like to drag my red surface, metallic red surface up. Let's do that quickly. So again, cell mask, select this surface on the right. Let's select two surfaces this time, and now you can see that those both are selected. What I failed to do is to clear the existing masking. So I'll do this again, this surface and this surface. And what I would like to do is to invert. So invert and click the paint, and let me change the color to be something around blue. And here you have the first blue. You can see that because we are adding material on top of each other, you can see that one area is affecting the other area. By the way, you can control this if you go to your stroke and scroll all the way down here and click on front facing vertex only. That means only the front facing vertex and those side will be impacted, but the one on the back would not. Let me get out of the cell mask tool and clear it. Now we have a steel cube with different colors. We have a wooden texture. We have an eye. Let's have fun with something similar to an eye, but using other textures. So what I'll do now is I'll take the eye, I'll clone it and move it all the way to the side. And in here where it becomes more interesting, I want to get back the color into white, and I want the texture. So I am in paint, the color is white. I don't want any metalness. I could have a little bit of roughness, and I have a lava here. And if I start adding the lava, you can see it's really cool. If I go to my stroke and change the fall off to be more of this curve, that means I wouldn't have these sharp edges on the side. So you can see what's happening here, yeah? So what can we do with that? Let me first of all force paint the color white so we don't have the eyes behind, and then start adding this material from different sides. And again, you can solo it, so it's the only object you're looking at, and I am just adding it here and there. This could be combined, and I'll show you in a moment, with the actual textures of the lava, which would be looking really good if you are using the correct alpha. The same could be for grass, for skin. So it took me some time to fill every object, and because I have the fall off, so it appears seamless. It's not 100% seamless, but it appears seamless, and you can see now I have filled it with these textures, and now it looks like lava. So I've mentioned that you could combine this with an actual extrusion or subtraction, and how to do so is using the stamp. So if I click on the stamp and go and select an alpha that correspond to my actual texture. So for example, let me find a noise alpha somewhere here. This looks interesting. And then I have the tools, which is the stamp tool here as grab dynamic radius. And then I go to texture and turn on texture and then turn on the actual texture. What happens here, you can see there is a slight effect that's showing you the extrusion. If I move the intensity higher, you can see that now we have a distortion that we are dealing with. So let's move it a little bit smaller. And now you can see we are creating this lava, and this lava has a texture. And if I go around creating all of these, you can see that the impact of it is pretty much strong. One thing I would also keep in mind is that I don't use these much, the stamp and textures in combination, because it does not look as I would like it to be. However, it's one way, and you can always go back, by the way, and change color. By the way, if you have it as erase, as you've seen me, then that would erase the actual texture. And you could combine this, which is something I like, with the material properties which I've discussed before. So if I go back in here, and you can see I have this lava which does not look as shiny as a lava. If I go to the material properties and change this to always unlit, that would make it spark, as you can see in here. Keep in mind that if I start smoothing it, this would also smooth the textures and all of the actual stamp subtraction or addition that we have done. So again, textures work with vertices, something to keep an eye and mind on. You can always go back and redraw them so they look clear and crisp as you would like them to be. So now we have a lava. We've created an eye. So if I have two of these could be added to my character. Let me show you other stuff that you could do with it. So let me take again the same sphere. I would like to clone it. Click on clone, move it all the way here and bring it back to be solo. I have here a few textures I would like to take you through it. Going back to paint, put the roughness a little bit higher, force paint it all, and let me play with the grass tool. So I have a grass tool here, a grass texture, and if I start dragging it, you see the impact of the grass. And if the fading is too much and you don't like that, you can undo it, go to stroke. And I like this this curve when actually using textures. And let me, similar to what we've done before, drag, and until I actually cover all the faces. You can always turn symmetry, but I always prefer to randomly adding these textures. And as you can see, it's just a matter of you moving your object around, making sure that the material is actually projecting on it. Now we have this, let me look front, and we have the textures of the grass appearing. If it's not as correct as you would like it to, you understand that we need to add another subdivision, and now you can see the impact of the grass, which looks better. Something to keep in mind on, don't go very much high with your subdivision. This might crash your iPad or your device, depends on which device you are using. So now I have this, which looks pretty much as a grass. You can again combine that. So if I go to stamp and make sure that I have selected the grass, I have selected this texture, and to go back to my brush, and I've already used the same texture. So I have here the same texture as the one I'm using for I'm having the same alpha used from the texture. So that should give it a little bit of more accuracy. I don't want to do this everywhere, but let's do it on top. So on top here, if I click on top, it snaps, and now I can have this kind of texture showing. What I like about it again is that you have the control over how your textures look like, and you can see now even with slight differences in the textures and material, you can achieve a lot. The last thing I would show is the skin, and I think skins are very interesting, especially if you're doing more of a realistic or something similar to my style, where you have a very stylized character but you apply these kind of textures that makes them more realistic. So click on clone here, drag it all the way down, and similar to what I have done before, I know I am repeating myself and by now you have understood it, but again, repetition makes perfect. So go to paint, change this into force paint all. Usually human skin has a little bit of shyness into it, so I will force paint this. I have a human texture and let us check it before. It looks quite decent, as you can see. You could, by the way, add another subdivision just to make it more clear, and I'll add this here, again here, and here. You can do the same, so you can create a human flesh cube if you would like to, but I think human skin is a biological material, and it would work better on biological or more of a organic shapes. Now I have this all in place. I can move again to my stamp, which is here, and loading for the alpha the textures for human, which is the one I have in here. You can change the intensity somewhere here. This looks too intense, and I think we have not selected the right texture, that's why it looks green. So the skin texture with this skin alpha, you can invert it if you would like to, and you can start seeing now we have this in place. I want to just slightly have this skin texture impacting my object, and again it's a matter of you trying to play with these settings. So let's have it somewhere around 2%, if that would work, and this looks quite nice. If I invert it again, so go back here and invert it, I think it would look even better because of the differences between the grooves and up objects. And we have now the skin in place. Again, what would be really interesting is that you combine your understanding of material properties. The last thing I would do, and this is not quite organic, but I like it because I want to show you how you could combine the material and texture with something else in the material properties. So go to paint. In here I would select this marble, and as you can see, one thing you need to keep in mind is that the texture has the alpha channel, meaning if it's a PNG with no background, it would appear here, and that would be great if you're creating stamps, if you're adding some symbols, some icons to your object, and numbering as well. For example, if you have sculpted a watch, you could add these little numbers into it. So what I'll do now is force paint this, move the roughness all the way down, and I have this marble texture. And again, if I want all the texture to show as it is, I remove the alpha. If I want to have a little bit of control, I can go back to the alpha and choose the square, and that would square it for me. If you don't want that squaring to be that much, you can scale it down, and in here you would have a more of a cleaner edges for your square alpha. So keep this in mind. It's a combination of different tools, and what you feel more comfortable with is what you would use the most. And in here we didn't use much actually. What we needed is a couple of strokes because it's anyhow squared, it's a rounded alpha, and now we have it added to our object. What I would like now is simply for this marble is to change the material properties to, for example, refraction. And in here, I don't want it to be two-sided, but one-sided. And if I turn it off now, you can see it might be very slight, but it is actually showing you a little bit of refraction from the object behind. Now we have all of this created. Let me just change the material to be quality of full resolution, max samples, reflection, and a little bit of ambient occlusion. What I do usually with the ambient occlusion is put it as higher size and higher strength, and then work it into what I think looks appropriate and all the way down. And of course, this would work with any kind of light. And if I start changing my lighting, my HDR, that would change the material according to the reflection and refraction we have. And because, as you can see, this is unlit, it is not impacted, and it's the only one that is actually stable. This would be it for this video. I hope this clarified the texture use for you, and now you have gained a better understanding of how you apply these textures into your design. Two things to keep in mind: it works with a combination of the paint properties, which is reflection and roughness and metalness, and also it works in combination with alpha, and always it works based on the mesh density because it's a vertex applied texture rather than a mapped texture. So keep this in mind. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have a question, please consider asking this question in the comment below. Share this video with others who are hungry to learn about Nomad Sculpt, and I'll see you in another video. Don't also forget to subscribe to this channel. That would be of tremendous help for me. I'll see you around in another video. Bye bye now.